Hezbollah Secretary General says extremist agenda in the region has failed and vows that the resistance axis will triumph over terrorism in Syria. Billionaire Petro Poroshenko takes the lead in Ukraine's first round of presidential elections. And millions of Shia pilgrims flock to the Iraqi capital Baghdad to commemorate the martyrdom of Imam Musa al-Kadhim. Hello, you're watching Al-Ittijah World News. I'm Zainab Alawi. The Lebanese Islamic resistance group Hezbollah commemorated the 14th anniversary of the resistance's victory and the liberation of Lebanon from Israeli occupation. Hezbollah Secretary General Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah addressed thousands of supporters in Bint Jbeil via video link, in which he insisted that the Western Zionist and extremist project in the region has failed, and the Syrian government, along with its resistance axis, will triumph.
In 2006, there was a regional project, but the battle was in Lebanon. We, the Lebanese resistance and the Lebanese people and army, all stood and fought against this project. Iran and Syria stood by Lebanon. Now our enemies have a new version of this project, but the battle is in Syria. This project has begun to fall apart and it will be foiled. Syria will be victorious and the resistance will be victorious. There will come a time when the truth will be uncovered, and Syria will be thanked for its resistance, steadfastness, and victory.
Regarding the participation of Hezbollah's resistance fighters in Syria, Sayyid Nasrallah maintained that the resistance's deterrence on the southern border with occupied Palestine remains strong.
Despite everything happening in Syria, I stress to you that the resistance has maintained its force of deterrence, and this is what the enemy acknowledges. It is working night and day to develop this force of deterrence, and this is what is making the enemy anxious. In this issue of possessing a force of deterrence, one cannot say we have enough assets at a certain point, as we are speaking of the Israeli entity and one of the strongest armies in the world. Therefore, we must improve our deterrence, regardless of those who are raising the issue of the resistance arms.
Hezbollah chief Sayyid Nasrallah also touched on the continued Israeli violations of Lebanese sovereignty, warning the resistance will not remain silent.
Israeli violations have recently increased on the international border with occupied Palestine, such as threats against civilians, abductions, attacks, and shooting against Lebanese shepherds and farmers. The resistance won't stand idly by if violations on the southern border reach an extent that requires our intervention. We won't remain silent over any attack against our people along the international border. In other news now, presidential candidate Petro Poroshenko has taken a huge stride to become Ukraine's next president. Exit polls showed earlier this night, averting the need for a runoff vote next month that he warned could destabilize the country. Two polls gave Poroshenko, a billionaire businessman with long experience in government, around 56% of the vote, while ahead of former Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko in second place with just over 12%.
We can state today that this election, which is crucial for the future of our country, has taken place. And you see that all exit polls without exception, which were held by the most credible polling organizations in the country and the whole world, show with very small discrepancies that the election is over after the first round and the country has a new president.
It's election day in Ukraine, and the self-proclaimed authorities imposed on the country following the ouster of President Viktor Yanukovych look set to solidify their grip on power.
I hope the elections are special and will give Ukraine a chance to develop further.
We need freedom to fight against corruption, and gangsters have to go to jail. That's all we need.
Polling booths opened at 8 a.m. local time, and an official outcome is due before international monitors deliver their verdict on the process on Monday afternoon. But the polls aimed at shoring up the legitimacy of the politicians in Kiev and solidifying the West's grip on the so-called post-revolutionary Ukraine are fraught with problems. The eastern regions of Luhansk and Donetsk, which declared self-rule earlier this month, are boycotting the elections. And while troops loyal to Kiev stepped up their assault against pro-Russian activists in a bid to impose their will on the eastern regions, residents in the newly founded Novorossiya destroyed polling stations and forced EU election monitors to pull out.
On our own territory, there are so many troubles. You talk about an election, there's no election for us at all. No kind of election matters to us, because the main thing for us is to survive.
Honestly, I'm not taking part in the election because I have no desire to go and choose someone from this delegation that for 23 years is exactly the same. No one has changed. They are exactly the same team, so to say, and they are fighting for their own power and shoot peaceful people. It's really insulting. That's why for me, the election doesn't mean anything.
If there was someone to vote for, I would go. But there's nobody to vote for, and everything is decided without us.
What's perhaps even more farcical about the vote is the fact that Kiev still considers 15% of its electorate to be in the Crimean Peninsula, which voted to secede from Ukraine and join the Russian Federation in March. So who gets what when the vote counting is over and done with? Well, the election frontrunner oligarch Petro Poroshenko may find himself deadlocked on governmental decisions, with far-right neo-Nazi groups which now have a strong contingent of MPs in the parliament. Those who took part in the ouster of Yanukovych earlier this year made sure to considerably reduce the power of the president in favor of the legislature, which they now dominate. Kiev hopes the elections will help usher in stability in the Ukraine after 6 months of unrest. However, many in the east doubt that this election will bring about any favorable changes.
Former Ukrainian Prime Minister and presidential candidate Yulia Tymoshenko cast her vote in the country's presidential elections, reassuring voters that a European Ukraine will ensure peace and justice.
Today is a celebration of democracy for Ukraine. The celebration of liberation was presented to us by those people who were in Maidan, who ousted a dictator, an authoritarian regime, and opened the path for real change. Today I voted for a European Ukraine that can change the life of every Ukrainian. I voted for a European Ukraine that means peace and justice in our country. I am confident that Ukraine can be strong, happy, and rich if it becomes a part of the European Union. I know that it is time to hold a referendum on joining NATO to restore peace in Ukraine, and so that peace becomes for us a strategic perspective so that no one can ever again capture any of our territory.
Sergei Tyhibko, another presidential candidate, stated that the poll is a chance to replace the leaders who clearly are not coping with the crisis in Ukraine.
The election is taking place at very tense time, but today we have a chance to replace the leaders who clearly are not coping with the situation. It is very important who gets elected for the post of president, whose main task, which needs to be achieved whatever the price, is to restore peace. And I believe we have a chance to achieve it.
For his part, acting Ukrainian President Alexander Turchinov said voting is essential for the stabilization of Ukraine with a better future.
After the presidential elections, we will have finished constructing the government of Ukraine, and all the government institutions will be built. It's very important. It's a principle for stabilization of the situation in Ukraine. After that, we will go towards our democratic, European, peaceful future.
Well, as the presidential elections were taking place in various Ukrainian cities, thousands of pro-federalization demonstrators took to the streets of the eastern region, protesting against the polls. The rallies took place in Lenin Square in central Donetsk, as well as in the eastern port city of Odessa. Several hundred also took to the streets of Kharkiv. Demonstrators were calling for a boycott of the vote, which they consider illegitimate. Meanwhile, Ukrainian citizens living in Russia headed to the Ukrainian embassy in the capital, Moscow, to cast their ballots. Voters expressed hope the polls will help bring an end to the political turmoil in neighboring Ukraine.
I came here with a very simple objective in mind. I want peace to prevail in Ukraine, peace and calm. Therefore, I think this election is necessary and it will help peace.
I voted for someone who's defending the interests of Russian-speaking residents of Ukraine.
And with us to discuss these elections further is Anastasia Krylova. She's a journalist based in Kiev. Thank you for joining us today, Anastasia. Will these elections bring an end to the months-long tension that has taken hold in Ukraine, or will it make matters worse?
It seems right now that this election been the most important election for the whole history of Ukraine, and clearly everybody are happy that the results are obvious already from the first round, and there is no need to wait another 3 weeks for second round. How if the candidate would not gather more than 51%, who is Petro Poroshenko today. And
everybody is happy, of course, except for those in the east, right? How legitimate are these elections with millions in the east boycotting these elections?
What I meant is everybody are happy that it happened from the first attempt, but and I'm not speaking about the result, of course. However, about answering your question, a small percentage of people didn't manage, not small, pretty, in those regions where people didn't manage to vote, it's around 3 million people. It's those regions which are where the tensions were happening last couple weeks. Lugansk, Donetsk, Kharkiv. Kharkiv region still managed to vote mostly, but Donetsk, the city itself, which is the central city of the region, not a single place to vote was open because it was too dangerous. And I think even if election commissions worked, I think that people wouldn't simply go and participate because it's so dangerous. They would have to put their personal information, which would put them in straight danger of those groups who are acting and who are acting with violence there against everybody who are trying to vote or to show their political opinion other than if they are pro-Russian. It is considered to be legitimate all over the country because on the other parts of the country, the percentage of people who voted is so high that it's first time in the history. It's more than by different information, it's around 55-60% or more. So it's extremely high percentage, which is also not only on western regions, but also in Kiev, in central regions, and even in the south of the country, which is traditionally considered to be pro-Russian. But it's also a very high percentage of people who voted, and among different candidates, the thing that unites all people who voted is the pro-European position. So it's all four first candidates who took around 95% of all votes. They hold a pro-European position and for united Ukraine.
Yes, and exit polls show that Petro Poroshenko is set to become the next president. So what scenarios are we looking at here for Ukraine under his rule?
Good question. So the major position of Petro Poroshenko is that his major line is that he wants to work with everybody in Ukraine in order to unite everybody and in order to bring Ukraine to finally the so long expected peace, cooperation of all regions, and further political steps in foreign policy will be pro-European. Further integration with European Union, finally to sign the agreement, which Viktor Yanukovych, the previous president, refused to sign in November last year, from which revolution started. So that's the major point number one in his foreign policy. And in internal policy, as I said, he wants to unite everybody, and he is ready to cooperate with all the parties, and also with all allies all over different strength. So, for example, he is said to work with oligarchs and trying to make them work for the benefit of the country, which some people don't like because they don't like but when oligarchs have any access to power through some candidates. But on the other hand, as experience shows, that when oligarchs are put in some ruling position and giving some rights to act legally, they have a really strong influence. So one of which is currently the head of Dnipropetrovsk region, and he's been Dnipropetrovsk region being like the most safe, where the separatists tried to act, but violent acts were there was the last percentage of violence where the separatist group were trying to do something, but they didn't manage there. It is considered to be thanks to the actions of oligarchs.
Okay, now at one point during the campaign, the second leading candidate, Yulia Tymoshenko, threatened to start a new wave of street protests if Poroshenko wins. Now, is she still with the same stance? Are we likely to see more demonstrations, more protests?
It doesn't seem so, because right now Tymoshenko has already made a statement that she recognizes the results of these elections. She didn't greet, however, Petro Poroshenko yet, which everybody are expecting if she will do this or not, or she might expect official result of voting, like some candidates are, which may be done and should be done until June 3rd. But already right now from exit polls it is obvious, so we're expecting her to make her statement whether she recognizes and whether she's going to cooperate with Petro Poroshenko or not, because he already stated that he wants to cooperate with her, but so far she is the only one who he doesn't find common language, even though he said that he is going to cooperate with Yatsenyuk, who is right now representative of Tymoshenko's party in the parliament.
Okay, now what can you tell us about this trip by Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev to Crimea, which was denounced by Kiev actually as a provocation?
Yes, everybody says that it's clear provocation. It's just like when Putin visited Crimea on May 9th. So it's just to make influence on people who like them, who sympathize Russian politicians, and that's like they choose the important date for Ukrainians, and they choose to show their attention to Russian followers in Ukraine on those important dates, which seems that although they state that they are going to recognize the results of the elections, that Russia is going to make further steps in order to stabilize the situation in Ukraine, it seems that what they're actually doing in fact is to keep forcing the escalation of the conflict between the people who have different views of Ukrainian future.
And are we going to see a positive impact on the Ukrainian economy as a result of these elections?
I really hope so, because right now the strategy of cooperation which Petro Poroshenko has chosen seems the only way for further developments in the country. Further split of the country would only make it difficult because everything is interconnected right now so hard that if some regions would split from Ukraine, it would cause problems and economical tensions both in the regions and both in the other parts of Ukraine. So if we will manage to unite, if we will manage to cooperate, how Petro Poroshenko stated, that would hopefully have a positive impact. And also the economical association with Europe, it is said to have different effects on Ukrainian economics. However, in the long term, it's going to have a positive impact.
Okay, Anastasia, thank you very much for joining us today. Anastasia Krylova-Vera, journalist based in Kiev. Stay with us here on Al Ittijah World News, still to come. Pope Francis arrives in occupied West Bank as part of his Middle East Holy Land tour.
يابا، شايف هاي الأرض؟ شايفها يابا؟ هاي البلاد، هاي أرض سيدي وسيدك، هاي أرضك، هذا وطنك، هاي أرضنا يلي انحرمنا منها، هاي زيتونتنا اللي بالسهل، هاي زيتونتنا اللي بالسهل، هاي امك، ما في اغلى من الام يابا، ما في اغلى من فلسطين يابا.
Hello again, you're watching Al Ittijah World News. Our top stories are: Hezbollah Secretary General says extremist agenda in the region has failed and vows that the resistance axis will triumph over terrorism in Syria. Billionaire Petro Poroshenko takes the lead in Ukraine's first round of presidential elections. And millions of Shia pilgrims flock to the Iraqi capital Baghdad to commemorate the martyrdom of Imam Musa al-Kadhim. Millions of Shia Muslims commemorated the martyrdom of the revered 7th Imam Musa al-Kadhim in the Iraqi capital Baghdad amid tight security measures.
Brave in bomb scares and suicide attacks, millions of Shiite Muslims flocked to Kadhimiya, north of the Iraqi capital Baghdad, to commemorate the martyrdom of Imam Musa al-Kadhim. On this day in 799 AD, and after being imprisoned for decades by the Abbasid Khalifa Harun al-Rashid, Imam Musa al-Kadhim was poisoned and his body was left on the streets for days. His friends and family were able to retrieve his remains and bury the Imam in secret. For this reason, a coffin draped in green is carried by mourners through the streets of Baghdad to the Golden Domed Shrine, where it is placed in the courtyard as the story of the 7th Imam is narrated to the weeping masses. For days, worshippers from across Iraq and the world converged on the holy shrine to witness the moment the coffin arrives and to pay their respect to the Imam. Many pilgrims walked for hours and even days to be in Kadhimiya on this anniversary. Tents were set up along the way, offering free food and water.
We have come from Nasiriyah walking on foot heading to the Imam. Bombings that took place in Abdul Muhsin al-Kadhimi Square and in other places would not prevent us from visiting and coming on foot to Imam Musa al-Kadhim. We learn from Imam's patience because they had sacrificed themselves for the faith and to set the right and defeat the wrong.
Security was tight and checkpoints have been erected on every entrance to the shrine to prevent any further attacks by extremist groups. On Thursday, 32 people were killed on their way to the shrine. However, this did not stop visitors, who appeared undettered by the violence and have once again made the journey in the millions.
Iraq's semi-autonomous Kurdistan region has slammed illegal action filed by the central government against Turkey, saying it was illegitimate and likely to fail, the latest in worsening ties between Baghdad and Arbil. The Kurdish Ministry of Natural Resources statement comes just days after Baghdad's oil ministry filed a request for arbitration against Ankara at the Paris-based International Chamber of Commerce after crude from Kurdistan was exported to international markets via a Turkish port. The 7th General Assembly of Islamic Radio and Television Union kicked off in the Iranian capital, Tehran. A keynote speaker at the conference was Iranian President Sheikh Hassan Rouhani, who urged Muslim media outlets to continue their battle against Western propaganda.
The 7th Event General Assembly of Islamic Radio and Television Union Conference, attended by representatives of the media and other relevant institutions from 30 countries, kicked off in the Iranian capital Tehran on Sunday under the motto of Awakening Media Outlets, Voice of Resistance and Confrontation with Religious Sedition. During his opening speech, President Sheikh Hassan Rouhani said the Islamic Republic can play a major role in the global fight against extremism.
We can be the flag bearer of fighting against extremism and introduce the real image of Islam to the world.
Rouhani also called on the media outlets in the Islamic world to brace themselves for a major cultural confrontation with the West, which he said wants Muslim nations sidelined from modern advancements.
The Western world does not want the Islamic world to achieve the modern technology. It deems its hegemony as monopolizing the modern technologies, and for the very same reason, it wants to make the Islamic and developing world lag behind with a multi-year gap.
The Iranian president also slammed the recent abduction of a group of Nigerian schoolgirls by the Takfiri terrorist group Boko Haram, saying that the act was part of a scenario to tarnish the image of Islam.
In response to all those who have chosen the wrong path under the West's direction and portray jihad and religion as creation of terror and violence, we should demonstrate the compassionate image of Islam.
Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh also addressed the assembly live from Gaza City via video link. The 5th Islamic Film Market Festival, the 5th Ittihad Festival, and the 4th Exhibit of Media Equipment and Technology will also be held on the sidelines of the General Assembly, ending on Wednesday. The participating countries are also displaying their latest media products and technology in an exhibition considered by observers as an important occasion in which Islamic countries have the opportunity to debate in an unbiased media atmosphere.
Earlier, our Tehran correspondent Hussein Dawash gave us some first-hand information on the significance of the 7th Islamic Radio and Television Union Conference there in Iran.
The purpose really of this conference and this exhibition or market or whatever you like to call it is really to bring together the many news channels and radio stations across the Muslim world and to align them in what Iranian President Sheikh Hassan Rouhani mentioned as a campaign by the West and the Israeli entity against the Islamic world to tarnish the image of Islam because apparently he claims that these same nations have not brought down or failed to accomplish their goal of bringing down the resistance in Palestine on foot, on the ground. Now they're taking it elsewhere, which is to the media. And in this, I've spoken to several people here at the conference after the speech of Sheikh Hassan Rouhani, and they all believe that unity is first and foremost, and they also have inaugurated even more members more than the last year's 280 something members. More channels are coming out in the region to tell the truth. Basically, the campaign of this from the union side is to give a new message, an alternative message, a new door to the West, to Westerners who are not really in close touch to what this side of the world has to say. In fact, they take much of their news from Western companies who are affiliated with Western governments.
Now, at least 10 people were killed and more than 25 injured after two car bomb attacks struck one of the busiest districts in Syria's central city of Homs. The twin bombings targeted the Alawite inhabited neighborhood of Al-Zahra as one of the seemingly harmless vehicles was parked in a collective taxi stand, killing 10 people and causing massive material damage, while the second car bomb exploded in another district, wounding 3 people but without causing any fatalities. Prominent Bahraini human rights activist Nabil Rajab was released from prison after spending more than 2 years in detention. Rajab was initially sentenced in August of 2012 to 3 years in prison for advocating peaceful demonstrations against the Bahraini monarchy over its civil and human rights abuses in the troubled Persian Gulf kingdom. Later in December, the Court of Appeals reduced the sentences to 2 years in prison. Well, security is on high alert as Egypt gears up for the upcoming presidential elections, with tens of millions expected to take part in the vote, which will be closely monitored by international observers. Karim Azzeddin filed this report from Cairo.
With Egypt's presidential elections just hours away, the country's armed forces have deployed 181,912 personnel ahead of the two-day vote this week in order to secure polling stations and the voting process during the long-awaited poll. In a statement issued earlier, the armed forces said that it would undertake security measures on Monday and Tuesday in coordination with the Interior Ministry and the Supreme Elections Commission to provide a safe environment for the 53,909,306 Egyptian citizens casting ballots across 25,343 polling stations. Egyptian security forces have called on citizens to refrain from bringing bags or personal belongings to polling booths and wait for vehicles a safe distance away from voting stations. Many Egyptians, though, are optimistic about what these elections may bring to the country and satisfied with the security measures being taken by security forces.
Regarding the security situation of the elections, I've seen army vehicles heading to polling stations, which is a good indication that it is going to be a safe voting environment, which encourages citizens to participate in the democratic process.
I am very optimistic about these elections, and hopefully it will bring a better future for the country.
Several diplomatic delegations, including an observation mission from the European Union, the African Union, the Arab League, Arab Parliament, and other international organizations are gearing up to monitor the 2 voting days on Monday and Tuesday to guarantee its integrity and transparency. In addition, NGOs are also observing the election using different approaches. The Global Network for Rights and Development and the Carter Center, which has closely followed polling in Egypt over the last 3 years, will also be monitoring the vote.
The EU mission is here to rate the democratic process, but it won't be too involved in the voting process. I think the mission will provide a general observation.
The participation of these missions is a good indication that the Western world and African organizations are convinced we're going through a democratic phase. Their observation is a routine process to guarantee the transparency of the elections.
With the presidential elections less than 24 hours away, and with the armed forces already taking their positions to secure the voting process, the general mood in Egypt seems optimistic over the integrity and the security of the upcoming elections. Reporting for Litiga TV from Cairo, Karim Azzeddin.
Well, the situation in Thailand appears to be going from bad to worse. At least 3 people were killed and 55 injured in a spate of bomb attacks in the south of the country, as thousands of anti-coup protesters rallied in the capital, Bangkok.
According to a reliable military source, former Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra has been released from detention after being held for a few days by the military. The military had also detained scores of other ousted government leaders and opposing political figures since the coup was mounted. A military spokesman recently sought to assure the media that the detainees are safe and that their detention is aimed at resolving the political crisis plaguing the country.
As for the detention of those who reported to the council, it was done so that we can create an understanding in the conflict and let them clarify what they have done. They have been provided with an appropriate place and surroundings. They were not tied up, beaten, or tortured by any means.
Earlier today, at least 3 people were killed and 55 injured in a spat of bomb attacks in the south of the country, as thousands of anti-coup protesters rallied in the capital Bangkok. According to military and local media reports, the evening attacks occurred in the provinces of Pattani, Yala and Narathiwat. Although no side has claimed responsibility for the attacks, suspicion is likely to fall on Islamist rebels in the Muslim-majority region, which borders on predominantly Muslim Malaysia. The rebels want a level of autonomy, accusing Thai authorities of riding roughshod over their Malay culture and carrying out human rights abuses. The attacks come amid a political crisis that has rocked Thailand for months. Following the open declaration of a coup led by the country's army chief, General Prayut Chan-o-cha, public anger has been growing as more than 1,000 protesters marched across the capital Bangkok in defiance of an army warning against protests. It was the largest show of dissent since the army seized power on Thursday after months of political turmoil. Meanwhile, and after suspending $3.5 million in defense assistance and joint military exercises in response to the coup, the United States has also scrapped planned visits by senior officials to Thailand. Analysts, however, have warned of an immediate risk emerging for Washington as the Thai military could further embrace China. Thailand, which historically has sought alliances with preeminent powers, has better relations with China than do many of its neighbors. China has not criticized the army takeover and was the first to recognize the last coup in 2006, leading to closer defense ties between the two nations.
Pope Francis has arrived in occupied Palestine after calling for peace in the region while visiting the West Bank. The pontiff flew to Tel Aviv by helicopter on the second day of his 3-day Middle Eastern visit. The leader of the world's 1.3 billion Roman Catholics is to preside over a joint prayer service in occupied Al-Quds.
Descending from a helicopter that flew from Jordan directly to the occupied West Bank, Pope Francis touched down on the sacred soil of Bethlehem for the first day of his visit to occupied Palestine. The official purpose of the pontiff's visit is to cement ties with the Orthodox Church. However, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has already been at the heart of sideline talks with President Mahmoud Abbas.
The time has come for everyone to find the courage to be generous and creative in the service of the common good, the courage to forge peace which rests on the acknowledgement by all of the right of two states to exist and to live in peace and security within internationally recognized borders.
There is an act against the Palestinian Christians and Muslims in Jerusalem in order to displace them from the city. They are not letting worshippers from outside the city to pray in its shrines. We call on the Israeli government to end these acts which violate international law.
The Pope mobile then proceeded through the streets of the Holy City. It stopped near the apartheid wall as the Pope performed prayers under the shadow of an Israeli espionage tower. A solemn bow was later on observed at the Manja Square, where the head of the Catholic Church celebrated a mass with hundreds of pilgrims who came from all over the world. He delivered a message calling for an end to child labor and weapons trade. The Argentine native pope is scheduled to make a short flight to the occupied territories. His stop in the occupied Al-Quds coincides with the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of a meeting between Catholic and Orthodox leaders, an occasion that could however be interrupted by extremist Jews, who have already protested and vandalized a number of churches ahead of the historic visit.
Voters in 21 EU countries cast their ballots in the European Parliament elections on Sunday. The 7 other EU countries voted earlier this week in an election that is expected to see a surge of support for Eurosceptic parties. The vote is being held amid public anger at growing economic stagnation, a rise in unemployment rates, and harsh austerity measures. Fresh anti-World Cup rallies have been staged in Brazil as protesters continue to threaten the competition, which kicks off in a few weeks. Hundreds of demonstrators led by the outlawed Black Bloc group marched on central Sao Paulo to denounce the government's financial policy in spending public money on the tournament. The Latin American country has recently been hit by almost daily protests despite heavy security measures. Now dubbed the Tree of Life, the moringa is the latest plant species to enter the field of alternative medicine. Its possible benefits have made it the subject of study in Sudan. Our Khartoum correspondent Ahmad Said Ahmad has the details.
Mint, cardamom, and other herbs are all predecessors to a newcomer in the field of alternative medicine, moringa. Moringa has enthralled people all over the world with its medicinal and other surprising uses, which include biofuel.
The products of this tree are rich in minerals such as iron, phosphorus, calcium, and are also rich in vitamins such as vitamin A and vitamin C. It also strengthens the immunity system. It includes antioxidants and provides fodder to animals, which in turn provide milk and meat.
The most common genus of the plant, Moringa oleifera, is indigenous to the Himalayas, and Moringa stenoplata, native to Africa, are both used to treat ailments comprising vitamin deficiency and hair loss, among others.
The so-called life tree is used to treat diabetes, blood pressure, and obesity. It is also used to treat over 300 diseases, but attention must be paid to how it is used to accomplish these goals.
People use moringa in a variety of fashions, ranging from direct consumption of leaves and pods to applying moringa oil to one's body, as well as drinking moringa tea to regulate blood pressure and diabetes. This is the moringa tea, which includes a number of nutrient substances. It is prepared in the same manner as regular tea, but it mustn't be boiled. This is infant food, which serves as an alternative to Cerelac. The Sudanese president dubbed moringa the family tree, while the tree's benefits left such a strong impression that the country's Ministry of Science and Technology established the Moringa Research Council to explore the tree's prospects and held a conference at the ministerial level.
We are here today at the first Moringa conference to publish the research conducted by you, the researchers. Research which enriches our knowledge about the tree and to enlighten regular citizens, traders and consumers about the benefits of this great tree.
Moringa is being taken note of all over the world for its medicinal and commercial prospects, which are said to yield $25 billion annually. The government of Sudan ordered the allocation of 100,000 acres in each of the 18 states of the country for cultivating the so-called Tree of Life, in a step marking the significance of the plant. Ahmed Said Ahmed, Al-Ittijah News Channel, Khartoum.
Now a reminder of our top stories. Hezbollah Secretary General says extremist agenda in the region has failed and vows that the resistance axis will triumph over terrorism in Syria. Billionaire Petro Poroshenko takes the lead in Ukraine's first round of presidential elections. And millions of Shia pilgrims flock to the Iraqi capital Baghdad to commemorate the martyrdom of Imam Musa al-Kadhim. That's it for today. Have a good night.